This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
This is News Extra. My name is Stephen Imediegu, here with Nabila Usman. Countries across the world have called for a restraint after Iraq attacked Israel with hundreds of drones in a retaliatory missile strike. The attack on Saturday was in response to Israel's bombardment of an Iranian embassy in Syria, which killed 7 Iranian military officers. This attack has direct ties to Israel's war on Palestine, which has also expanded to places like Lebanon and Yemen, something that has long since raised fears of a total breakout of war in the Middle East. Now, since Saturday's attacks, countries like the US and the UK have declared support for Israel, while Iran has stood its ground, an indication that an escalation of the situation is more and more likely. In countries like Nigeria, one question looms large. What happens to Nigeria if a full-blown war breaks out in the Middle East? For more on this, we are joined by Chris Ngwodo, the Director of the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience. Good morning, sir. Good day, sir, and welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. So what is your reaction to the news of the, seeming escalation in tensions in the Middle East?
Well, I think alarm would be perhaps my first reaction. But now some sense of gratification. It appears that things have tempered down for the time being. An escalation, of course, will affect us. While not affecting us directly, will be very grave for us. It will have very serious secondary impact on our economy and even on social cohesion here in Nigeria. So I think that as our own government has called for restraint, for de-escalation, that is the right path to toe right now.
And I mean, in reference to that, this was the statement that was published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I believe this was yesterday, calling for a de-escalation. We know that at the moment there is an emergency UN Security Council meeting going on. But so far from what we've heard, it doesn't seem like Israel, which in this case was the initial aggressor with that attack on the Iranian consulate in Syria. It doesn't seem like Israel is willing to back down. They are being somewhat careful, but backing down totally does not seem to be on the table. I wonder if you expect that we will be able to see world powers exercise whatever influence to ensure that this doesn't actually happen.
Well, the main factor in Israel's decision to either escalate or de-escalate would be the posture of the United States. There's much evidence to suggest that Israel's aggression is based on a strategy intended to pull the United States into wider conflicts, into a much broader conflict in the Middle East. The U.S. government has no appetite for such an engagement. Remember that in the last 20 years, it has, lost a lot in terms of blood and treasure in the Middle East to costly wars there, and has no real appetite for any kind of engagement in the Middle East on that scale. So once the U.S. has signified its intention not to participate or not to be part of a broader conflict, then it is very likely that Israel will back down. The position of the UK would basically follow that of the US. So that is the biggest factor in determining whether Israel will take this further or whether it will simply stand down.
You make a very interesting point when you talk about the conduct of this conflict, depending on the stance of the US. Now, the US is convening the G7 meeting over Iran's attack on Israel, and they've repeatedly said that they are allies of Israel, they support Israel. I wonder if you can, I don't know if it's a hypothetical, or expand on this a little. In the event that we see an escalation in the Middle East, that would mean that Israel is fighting on more than one front. You have said that the US could probably step in at that point. But what does that mean for the rest of the world? And I most especially mean Nigeria.
Well, the biggest danger would not be simply in terms of the military conflict itself. Iran controls the jugular vein of the Persian Gulf. We've already seen how successful the Houthis have been in imposing, a certain sort of blockade within that region, maritime blockade, that is. The Strait of Hormuz is where about 35 to 40% of global oil traffic passes through. So one of the things we would be looking at in that scenario would be a situation in which Iran, along with the Houthis, are able to impose a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. That will immediately trigger a global oil price shock and effectively trigger an energy crisis globally in Europe and elsewhere. For us here, it will impact us because it will also compound our local inflation. Obviously, we import oil at this moment, so we will be impacted by that. And I think that really, for me, is the most significant global fallout of the conflict. The military hostilities will be happening, yes, in the Middle East, but the global fallout will be as a result of disruptions to trade. Now, countries like Nigeria, which depend on imported oil to a large extent for its energy security, will suffer collateral damage, as it were. Beyond that, in the event of a full-scale outbreak of hostilities, you would expect that such conflict would pull in global powers, the US, the UK, but Russia and China as well, which have partnerships with Iran. With the rest of the world on a war footing, it is very likely that resources that might have been devoted to development assistance and aid, on which we are significantly reliant, would now be devoted to wartime mobilization, defensive mobilization, and the like. That would reduce aid and development assistance to Nigeria and to Africa as well. And I think lastly, in the event that you have that sort of full-scale outbreak of hostilities, we are likely to see a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe. And given the high proportion of people of Middle Eastern descent in Europe, we are likely to see anti-immigrant sentiment growing, more right-wing nationalism, more resentment of people that would be deemed to be a fifth column in Europe. And I think that would also impact the Nigerian diaspora significantly. When these xenophobic frenzies break out, they don't tend to distinguish very much between shades of skin color. So we are likely to see an impact on the Nigerian diaspora, which would also impact the volume of remittances that we receive from Nigerians in diaspora. This is all the more so because right now we are seeing a realignment of global opinion, especially in the global south. We are seeing a realignment of opinion there, very much in favor of the Palestinians, very much in favor of resistance to what is viewed as Western-backed Zionist oppression of the Palestinian people. So I think that the reaction to that realignment of world opinion will be very stringent in places like Europe and also in the US. But it will certainly have an impact on us.
So, returning to Nigeria at the center of this conversation, right? You highlighted what disruptions we could see to global trade, which has a direct impact on our projections for growth over the next few years, if at all we see this escalation. I also want to talk about, to draw in your point on a realignment of global opinion, particularly from the global south. Nigeria has historically been a part of the non-aligned movement. In the last 3-4 years or so, we've seen some countries which used to be there shift accordingly, more directly tied to the Russia-Ukraine war, and now we have it here with Israel and Palestine. Do you expect that Nigeria will shift or reposition, especially not just Nigeria, but also the African continent as a whole?
It's likely, it is likely, we are possibly more likely to see that from countries like South Africa and the AU. The Nigerian position has been quite clear. We support the two-state solution. We've been consistent in calling for a ceasefire in Israel, in Gaza, within the context of the conflict in Gaza. I think that one other way in which this will impact us is that we also have to take note of the intra-Islamic sectarian tensions here in our own country between the majority Sunni population and the Shia minority community. So we are likely to see some exacerbation of those tensions. Broadly speaking, I would say that a lot of people here are really in favor of the Palestinians, have a great deal of sympathy with the Palestinians. Of course, we would also be looking at possible cleavages opening up between one half of our population that has pro-Israeli sentiments, and then another half of our population that has pro-Palestinian sentiments. So these things will have an impact potentially on social cohesion. But absolutely, I expect that the AU first, and the AU has already taken a very strong position on the conflict in Gaza anyway, so it will be a continuation of that. South Africa, as you know, has championed a case of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice, so it would not be a leap for them at all to move in that direction. And so I think that as the war intensifies, or should that scenario emerge, and as it intensifies, we will see a significant departure from non-alignment and one of active and sympathy, shall we say, with the Palestinian cause and the resistance, as it were, against Western-backed Israeli aggression.
Mr. Ngwodo, thank you very much for speaking with us today. That's News Extra on your Beyond the News station, Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. Our guest on the conversation was Chris Ngwodo, the Director of the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, speaking to us on what happens in Nigeria if the conflict in the Middle East spirals out of control beyond what we are seeing today. The conversations resume on your Beyond the News station, Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. We've got the news review coming next. We ask that you stay tuned right here on your Beyond the News station.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.